Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to Medieval Church History. I'm Teresa Holman, and with me is Father Michael Witt. Welcome, Father.
Thank you, Teresa.
We are in a show that I think is much needed at the moment.
Yes.
In today's 10th show, The Message of the Prophet.
True. In fact, the next couple of our programs are going to be dealing with the origins of Islam.
Mm-hmm.
Like you say, a very important thing for us to consider, because Christianity after 600 AD is always going to be impacted by Islam, and the other way around too. We're talking Crusades, we're talking, well, we've already talked about the ravages of the Saracens in medieval Europe. You know, the last program was Magyars and Muslims make mincemeat of Europe. And I think what we need to do then is go back and find out, who are these guys? Where did they come from? What's this all about? And it has a huge impact on us today, of course, because we're talking about 1.2 billion human beings following this faith.
A tremendous amount of people, and I think too many of us don't know.
Yeah.
Just know, but have a very, very basic understanding.
A lot of caricatures, you know, really cartoon character, and of course what happened this past year with those Danish cartoons tells us an awful lot too. Yeah, there is a real disconnect, and there's a great argument that goes on as to whether or not there is a cultural struggle taking place. Is that in fact what's taking place? Is it not? And certainly Pope John Paul II and now certainly Pope Benedict have attempted very positively to engage Islam.
Yes.
And so it's a lot of neat things. I've got a couple books I could recommend to people.
Oh, I think that'd be wonderful.
And the standard, really one of the finest books in English, is written by Karen Armstrong, and it's readily available. Any decent bookstore will have it, and it's simply called Islam, A Short History, which is what it is. It's about 200 pages long, and it is really a wonderful little handbook on the history of Islam.
Okay.
And then the other one, and then that came out, let me see, that came out in 2002, originally in 2000, and it was second 2002. There's another even more recent one, and this is by a young scholar. His name is Reza Aslan. And you see him every once in a while. He's often consulted on C-SPAN 2 or C-SPAN or whatever. Okay. But he's quite an interesting fellow. He's written this book called No God But God, The Origins, Evolution, and Future of Islam. And it's quite provocative also. Here is, I don't know what Armstrong's background is. I think she's a scholar. But here we have a Muslim. He's Iranian, was raised in the United States, but he is definitely a Muslim, coming from a Muslim's point of view, and so he's going to be telling the story as a modern author, but a Muslim author, and I think that he was very engaging. I really appreciated his book too, and this is just out. This just came out this past year, copyrighted 2005.
Okay.
Yeah. And then anything by Bernard Lewis. Now, Bernard Lewis doesn't do, I don't think, anything on Muhammad himself, but he does a lot on the history of Islam, especially in the 19th and 20th century. And anything Bernard Lewis does is really solid stuff, too. So those are just three really good authors to jump in on.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, we have to go to Arabia. And in Arabia itself, there is a basin called Mecca. And it is surrounded by mountains. It's a very important caravan center, a trading center. And in the middle of this town, this little village, is a religious site, a pilgrimage site, a sanctuary called the Cube, or in Arabic, and I'm not going to pretend I know any Arabic. I tried to learn it, and I gave up as far as when I got to the vocabulary. So, but the term is Kaaba.
Okay.
Okay. It is a roofless structure. It has no roof on it, but it has four stone walls. Okay, and the stone walls, at either end there are two openings, little carved doors in each end. And from time immemorial, people had in that region had been bringing to this little Kaaba, this little cube, statues of their gods. Okay. And so by the time we get to our story in the 600s, there are 360 such statues in this relatively small little structure. And it included, the whole panoply. It included statues of Isis from Egypt. There's a statue of the Syrian moon goddess. There were statues of Jesus and Mary. And so if you were to go to the Kaaba, you would have this impression that that it's a pantheon, that these are all gods and goddesses. And I think one of the things it tells us is the rather unsophisticated, untheological sense that people have of these religions, including Christianity. People looked upon Christianity as being this kind of animist kind of a thing. Now, we're going to see in many ways there's a real play of religions in this desert that's interesting in itself. The Arabs claim, those who lived in that area, claimed that this particular building was built by Adam.
Okay.
And I'm going to stress some credulity here.
Okay.
And that it was destroyed by the Great Flood, and that Abraham rediscovered its foundations while visiting Ishmael and Hagar. Now, this is, it's sort of like using the Bible.
Take it.
Take it for what it's worth. And, it's a legend. Okay. The fact is that there had been Jews living in Arabia for many, many centuries, even as early as the time of the Babylonian exile, when so many were hauled off to Babylon. Many of them escaped and went down into the deserts and found themselves there. Another influx of Jews came in after or around 70 A.D., when you had the Jewish revolt of 66 to 70 A.D., and the Romans coming in. Remember, this is when they destroyed the city of Jerusalem, or destroyed the temple at least, and then later another revolt in 132 A.D., and more Jews fled rather than being taken by the Romans and then hauled off to all parts of the Roman Empire in this great diaspora. Many of them made their way down. So there's a Jewish population that's been settled in there also, but because they are detached from Palestine, they're detached from Jerusalem itself, they developed over the centuries a very different kind of Judaism than most Jews would even recognize. You know? And because of the isolation. And so instead of the high culture grounded in Scripture, instead what you have is sort of a mystical Judaism that is heavily influenced by divinizations, by chants, by talismans, by soothsayers. And there's a group of these soothsayers called the Kohen, which actually would translate as priests. But in this case, they don't have a priestly function or a temple function anymore. They're acting as soothsayers and witch doctors, I guess you could really say. That's a very, very different kind of Judaism than we're used to, certainly in the West. And one particular object of theirs that's in the Kaaba is in the southeast corner. There's a black stone there. And the Jews of Arabia claim that was the stone that Jacob used as his pillow when he was sleeping. Okay. Take that for what it's worth. Now there were also Christians in Arabia, and they came from many, many different sources. There were Ethiopians, especially trading. Okay, and the also from in the south in Yemen, you have Christians there. These are very, very early churches, and one church in particular, at the city of Sana'a, which is still there. The city is still there. I don't know if the church is still there or not, but it was a magnificent church. And these are churches that originate from apostolic origins, right? Also, there in Arabia is going to be the influence of the Byzantines. Remember that the Western Church had not split with the Byzantines at this point, although they're a very different kind of, well, we've already talked about the Byzantine Empire. And in the north and in the west of Arabia, they'll have those influences. In fact, they have succeeded, the Byzantine Church has succeeded in bringing missionaries to the Arabs and have already converted an entire tribe in Arabia. It's the Ghazanid tribe. Unfortunately, they were converted to monophysite Christianity.
Okay.
And those Egyptian and Coptic Christians, they're monophysites too.
Sure. Okay.
But let me just say something real fast too. Some people, in fact, probably most people pronounce it monophysite. Okay. And we've had an argument at the seminary about how that's pronounced, and some have sided with me saying that the accent is on the penultimate rather than, well, anyway. I'm just going to continue calling it monophysites. Then also you have other religions that are influencing over to the east. You have the Persians, the Sassanid Persians. These are followers of a rather strange fellow by the name of Zarathustra.
Okay.
And his religion is known as Zoroastrianism. Okay. Now, this is a monotheistic religion, but it doesn't have the origins of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It's a monotheistic religion that was developed in Persia itself by this great philosopher, Zarathustra. And he argues that there is one God. There's only one God in the universe, and he refers to him, he gives him the name Ahura Mazda, meaning the wise Lord. Now, while there is only one God, there are two spirits, and these spirits compete for control of the universe, and there is the spirit of good and the spirit of evil.
Oh.
And there's a cosmic battle that takes place always between good and evil. It can be seen in that. And there's another philosopher that follows after him called Mani, and so he applies the Zoroastrianism to what becomes known as Manichaeism. And that Manichaeism will manifest itself in some of the rather diverse and aberrant forms of Christianity, like Gnosticism, and will even come back centuries later among the Cathars of southern France, the Albigensians and people like that. So it's around. Wow. And those people who would argue that there is a cosmic struggle between good and evil, that God does not have the power to overcome evil, that especially evil is physical and good is spiritual, and those kinds of people who break the universe into those kinds of categories are very much influenced by Manichaeism. So all of this, quite honestly, is very discouraging to a thinking Arab. Keep in mind that Arabia is a desert, but it's also at the confluence of so many trade routes.
Right.
And so everybody's coming through, and what they bring is very valuable stuff. It's spices, it's balm, it's silk, so all those very expensive stuff. And so they look around and they find themselves, these are Arabs who are thinking about this, ask the question then, which God is real? Or all of them? Or none of them? And as a result, within the Mecca Valley, there is a sense on the part of some people that there can only be one God, and let's just get down to the basics on this and recognize this one God. It's known as Hanifism, and it comes from the Arabic root HNF. Remember that Arabic, like Hebrew, doesn't have vowels in the same sense that we understand them. They're little dots and doodles and all that kind of stuff that designate that stuff. So anyway, the verb itself means to turn away from. And that's what the Hanifs turn away from, all this monotheism. And the legend has it that there were originally 4 of them. Okay. And the legend has that there were originally 4 of these Arabs who swore a bond of friendship and swore a bond of accepting monotheism and refusing, therefore, to be part of the Kaaba ritual. And in the end, 3 of the 4 of them converted to Christianity. One of them refused, arguing that that the original Hanafism would reject Christianity also. And his notion is that the God of Abraham is not the same God of Jesus Christ. Well, I think we would have an argument with that, and his 3 companions would have an argument with that. But anyway, the legend has it that this one man, his name is Zayd ibn Amr, follows the pure monotheism of Abraham. And he got himself into some trouble because when the pilgrims would come to Mecca, what they did was, part of the ritual was to circumambulate the Kaaba, to walk around the Kaaba 7 times. Okay. And that's what they were to do. And he would come and he would try to convince them not to do this. And some of his sayings, these are grounded in legend, but there's some truth to these legends. He would argue this. He would say to them, "I serve my Lord, the compassionate, the forgiving Lord. May he pardon my sins." Another one, and a couple others. And the reason why these are kind of important is because you're going to hear these words being used by Muhammad also, these phrases, "My Lord, the compassionate." That's okay. Another one of his sayings was, "Beware, O men, of what follows death." And another was, "You can hide nothing from God." Well, those are all pretty good.
All good.
Yeah, really. He demanded a very high moral standard for those people who would listen to him and follow him. And the legend has it that when he was an old man, Ibn Amir met a boy named Muhammad. Now, we have no idea whether there's any truth to this at all, and certainly Reza Aslan and also Karen Armstrong will argue that a lot that we think we know about Muhammad's early life is grounded in these legends. But we do have some facts, and the facts are not particularly happy for this kid. I mean, when we think about it, he was born in 570 A.D.
This is Muhammad.
This is Muhammad himself, yeah. His father's name was Abdullah, and his father died before his mother gave birth.
Wow.
So already he's born into a difficult situation. And already there are stories floating around, again, legends. But we have the legend of his mother's womb shining in the dark.
Okay.
I want to take that for what it's worth. But, and then also there's a legend that that when he was a young boy, he was accosted by 2 men wearing white gowns, and they pinned him to the ground, and one of them reached into his body and removed his heart. And he squeezed his heart, and black liquid came out. And then he washed his heart in a basin of snow and then put it back in.
Okay. I don't know what to say to that.
You don't have to believe that.
Okay.
Anyway, but there are all kinds of these legends. Well, we do know for a fact, again, let's get back to some facts. We do know that at 6 years old, his mother died.
Oh, okay.
So now here's a boy who's lost his father even before he was born. At 6 years old, now loses his mother.
It's a rough time in the world to be without either parent.
Isn't it for sure? Mm-hmm. And the only one around that could take him in is his grandfather. Mm. And so his grandfather then adopts him and brings him into the family, and he dies 2 years later. Mm. So now at the age of 8, this little boy has been bounced around from family to family, and finally he's lucky enough that there is a wealthy uncle who was out of town a lot because he was he owned a caravan business. So he's sort of the transport, guy of the age, and he then adopts Muhammad, and his name is Abu Talib. And he then, one of the things he does, because he's traveling all the time, so what he does is he brings Muhammad along with him as a boy, taking care of the camels and all those sorts of things. And again, there's another story that comes. This is a story that the caravan goes through a rather deserted area, and that there is a mystic living there. His name is Bahira, and he is a Christian. So many of the monks, lived out in the hinterlands by themselves, and this legend is that this mystic sees the caravan come by, waves to them, invites them over to have a meal with him, gives the people hospitality, and they all went over except for Muhammad, who was back feeding the camels and taking care of the camels, and in almost a sort of David and Samuel kind of a deal, Bahira says, but somebody's missing from your group. And they said, just this little kid. And he goes, well, bring him in also. And so they send for Muhammad. Muhammad comes. The mystic takes one look at this boy and says, quote, "This is the messenger of the Lord of the worlds." Again, this is a legend, but it's important for us to know that pious Muslims will hold to these legends much the way that Christians do. Also, I think especially when I thought about the shining womb story, I thought about the pregnancy of Saint Dominic's mother, and the legend that she had, shortly before giving birth to St. Dominic, had a dream in which a dog came out of her womb bearing a torch. Huh. In fact, if you see pictures of St. Dominic, a lot of times there'll be a dog near his feet with a torch in his mouth.
Really?
And that's part of that legend.
Okay.
That's only a
Interesting.
legend,
Well,
but
sure.
It's a cute little thing, And so these are pious legends. Well, anyway, what happens is that that Muhammad is living at a time, now he's traveling as a boy. Okay, he's now in his early teens. He's traveling with Uncle Abu Talib, and making his way in the world. At the same time, there is a consolidation of power and influence around Mecca. And one particular tribal family has got control of Mecca. And this is known as the Qusay tribe. Now, traditionally, Arabia was a very egalitarian place. And that's a rough place to be, and everyone kind of has to hang together. That's why, hospitality is so important. You got to take care of each other, and certainly even in the scriptures we've got so many examples of that. Remember when the three strangers come and Abraham has Sarah give them a meal and all. But anyway. That's very much the way things were, but now with the rise of the Qusay family, what happens is they gain more and more control of Mecca, and particularly the toll roads. That's important stuff because there's a lot of travel going back and forth. And then they take that money and they reinvest it in themselves, rather than sharing it with the poor and the marginalized. And this is something that is so traditional within Arab society, is to share what you have with the poor and the marginalized. And remember, Muhammad, although he's doing really well right now, he's an orphan. So he knows what it means to be on the outs. Mm-hmm. And he's very sensitive to this unholy change. Well, at around 25 years old, Muhammad caught the attention of a widow. Her name is Khadija, and she was very wealthy. She also was a caravan owner. And she proposed marriage to this 25-year-old guy.
Okay.
Okay. Now,
Do we know her age?
I don't know, but I'm expecting, I'm believing she's in her early 40s.
Okay.
Okay, I don't know that for a fact. But anyway, so you have a situation in which she's marrying way below her age, and he's marrying way above his status. But the two of them are very much in love.
Okay.
And eventually they'll have a daughter through this marriage. And he then is on his way toward an easy, happy life. You know, he's now on the inside circle. And things look like they're going to be pretty good, when in 610 A.D. he has a mystical experience. Muhammad evidently liked to get out of town from time to time and be by himself. He would take little days of recollection, off on his own. And in this particular case, he went up to one of the mountains that surrounds the Meccan Valley, the basin there, and it's called Mount Hira. And he goes up to Mount Hira, and then he's in sort of a cave or in a recessed area and just spending the day, when all of a sudden he himself reports that he felt this huge hug. Interestingly enough, about 10% of the human population reports that sometime in their life they have an ecstatic experience. That's kind of interesting. And it might be a very fleeting thing, or just a sense of well-being, that everything's right, and it's almost a divine reaffirmation.
Okay.
And I've talked to some people that had
that experience.
Yeah, I'd love to have it myself sometime.
Sounds pretty good, doesn't it?
Yeah, really. But anyway, he had this experience, but he said it was so strong that he thought he was going to die. He was hugged.
A crushing hug.
It was a crushing hug, yeah. And then a voice came to him, and it said, recite. And it said it 3 times, recite. And then he said recitations just flowed from his heart. And the original recitation itself, the original experience itself, is enshrined in the writings. Now, remember that Muhammad never learned how to read or write. Okay. And so what he did was he would, from this experience, I'll say something about this in a minute, but every experience that he had, and he had it for many years, he would come down off the mountain, and then to his followers who did write, he would dictate exactly what he had heard, and then this becomes the recitations, Arabic word meaning Quran. Quran meaning recitations. Anyway, in the 96th surah, which is like the chapters of the Quran, in the 96th surah, in the 1st to 5th verses, it says this: recite in the name of your Lord who created humanity from a clot of blood. Recite, for your Lord is the most generous one, who has taught by the pen, taught humanity that which it did not know. And so this is the beginning then of what's going to be 23 years of experiences.
Wow.
This will go on for 23 years. Well, anyway, the first time he has the experience, it worried him a bit. It worried him a big bit.
Okay.
And he came down off the mountain and went to his wife, Khadija. And the story has it that he thought he was having a nervous breakdown. Well, it's a pretty rough experience, and that he literally collapsed into her arms in a fetal position.
Wow.
And cried as he tried to explain to her what had happened to him on Mount Hira, and she calmed him down and reassured him, and then sent for her cousin, a man by the name of Waraka, who was a Christian. And Waraka came and listened to Muhammad's experience and said to him that this was of divine origin, that this was God speaking to Muhammad, and to be open to these experiences. Legend has it that Waraka was one of the 4 original Hanif who had become a Christian. We don't know that for a fact, but
Okay.
It fits. The story fits.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Anyway, what happens then is that Muhammad gets enough courage to tell other people what had happened to him on Mount Hira, and soon after he finds himself running afoul of the Qusayya tribe. Because he is denying the deity of all those little god statues in the Kaaba.
Uh-huh.
He is preaching also a social message of the good treatment of the weak against the mistreatment of the weak, which, of course, this family has been doing.
Mm-hmm.
And very soon, his own uncle, Abu Talib, who had been with him, is also a supporter of his, and a very strong supporter is Uncle Talib's son, a younger man by the name of Ali. Now, keep in mind then that Ali is a cousin of Muhammad,
Mm-hmm.
okay? And also Ali then marries Muhammad's daughter.
Oh.
Her name is Fatima.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so now Ali is a cousin, but he's also a son-in-law, as well as a big supporter. He plays a very important role after the death of Muhammad also, as we'll see a little bit later.
Okay.
Okay.
I was just thinking, is there a big age difference between Ali and Fatima? Or, I mean, there could be and there may not as well, because you have different uncles' ages.
Yeah, and I don't know that.
Okay.
I don't know.
Then
that
again, Muhammad had a big age difference between he and his wife, so.
Yeah, and keep in mind that a lot of this stuff is really couched in oral history and in legend. So
we don't know a lot of detail.
Yeah. For instance, we don't know how old St. Matthew was
Right.
when he wrote the gospel. We have no idea. That's simply a question that no one would have thought to ask back then.
Mm-hmm.
We got a pretty good idea about the age of St. John by the time he died, John the Evangelist. But outside of that, these were things that really didn't concern people much. We're fascinated by it.
But that's not there, right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, anyway, he does have, there are two sons that come from that marriage of Ali and Fatima, and they become followers of Muhammad also. Mm-hmm. It's Hassan and Hussein. You're going to be coming across names, by the way, that are very familiar to us, right?
Right.
Hussein is a
Ali.
well-known. Ali, yeah, is okay. They also, there's another young man who follows him, who is a former slave. He'd been freed from his slavery. His name is Zaid. And then there's another very wealthy Meccan by the name of Abu Bakr. And he plays a very important role later on, too. So Muhammad has a significant following of people in Mecca who are listening to him when he comes off the mountain, or they want more recitations. They have turned away from the Kaaba and turned away from the polytheism of the Kaaba. But things start getting ugly when, during one of the visits of the pilgrims, Muhammad has his own little saying. Remember that there were those other sayings by the Hanif? Mm-hmm. Okay. His saying is this: there is no God but God. Okay. And you could take, just like Reza Aslan used in his book, he has a lowercase God the first time around and then capital God afterwards. This is an attack on the cult of the Kaaba and also the managers, the Qusayyi, and they are not happy about this. So what they did was they decided the easiest thing to do would be to simply boycott all of Muhammad's clan. So they would not allow any business to take place.
End of it.
Well, this is big stuff, because their caravans, it's based upon trade. Mm-hmm. And so now they're facing financial ruin. Mm-hmm. At the worst possible moment, Uncle Abu Talib dies. Mm. And the same year, Khadija, Muhammad's wife, died too. Mm. And he was absolutely distraught. He really loved this woman. Really did, And so now he's absolutely distraught by this. He believes that he's got to leave Mecca for his own safety. And so they devise a plan to slip out, to go to a nearby city. It's called Yathrib.
Okay.
And over the next couple days, he and his followers quietly slip out of Mecca and head over to Yathrib. This is called the Hajira, and it's the moment at which Muslims begin their own calendar.
Wow.
So it's in 622 A.D., but 622 A.D., according to the Muslim calendar, is the year 1 A.H., Ad Hajira.
Yeah.
Okay? So, however, the world being as it is, everybody uses the Gregorian calendar that we use in the West. Although not everybody wanted to do that. Even England, Protestant England, continued using the Gregorian calendar all the way into the 1700s.
Right. That's surprising.
And then they finally had to give up to it. It's just, anyway. And so Muslims will continue using the AEC, BC, or AD, BC concept, but in their own circles, they'll use the AH concept. Anyway, when they get to Yathrib, the other name for Yathrib is Medina. Mm-hmm. Okay, when they get to the city there, they find a significant Arab Jewish population. These are Arabs who had converted to Judaism. But remember, the Judaism that in Arabia is different from a lot of others. And there, Muhammad receives protection and hospitality. And he's then given an opportunity to work with the others, his other followers who have gathered, in order to write up a constitutional document. And in a sense, then, what he sets up is a vision of the ummah, of the community. Or the ummah is a strange word. It translates as the house, or the nation, or the people, or a community. Okay. And Muhammad himself takes on the role of a Bedouin sheikh. And so he's like an overlord of his clan, of his household. His job is to be wise and to dispense justice and to protect the weak. And so then what happens is that he passes a whole series of laws for his little community, which become the basis for the Islamic way of life even to this day. He outlaws usury. Okay, you can't be lending money at interest and gouging people. He institutes what's called the zakat, which is a religious tithe, a mandatory tithe. Every one of his followers had to pay a certain percentage of their income every year, and it's collected by him, and then that money is then taken and given to the poor. And even to today, that zakat is still part and parcel. It's one of the 5 pillars of Islam. Women, this is controversial, but women are guaranteed the right to inherit their husband's property. Not all Arab women were allowed to do that. In fact, his wife was quite extraordinary in that. But no, he guarantees that women have the right to inherit their husband's property and also to keep their dowry as private property for themselves. So they're allowed to own property in ways that they would not have been otherwise. He allows divorce, which was allowed anyway in the Arab society, but he allows it only in certain cases, and both men and women could bring letters of divorce against each other. He allows polygamy. But that's another interesting point, too. The reason why polygamy is allowed is because, and it only happens a little bit later on, so many of his followers are killed in battle. And so their wives then have no way of being supported. And so he allows, and I know this sounds strange, but he allows men to marry more than one wife so that these widows could have husbands.
Okay.
You don't have to go along with that, but you have to understand.
This is the way it is.
That's the way it is. He himself married 9 women. Muhammad had 9 women. For the most part, they were done for political reasons rather than for sexual ones. He wanted to spread around the religions, and so he made sure that one of his wives was a Jew and the other was a Coptic Christian. and he did not interfere with their religious practices.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
There is one wife in particular that has been a real storm of controversy, and I think it's important for us to set this straight also. Her name is Aisha, and the reason why it's a controversy is because there are certain people who have claimed that he was a pedophile, that Muhammad was a pedophile, and they've simply taken the historical facts and twisted them around. She was betrothed to him at the age of 9 years old. Okay. But this was only a betrothal. And they were not formally married until after she had come into puberty, and the marriage was then consummated after that. So you could not accuse him of child abuse.
Right.
Okay, and that's it. There are a lot of there are a lot of brickbats thrown,
Sure.
and we need to just know what's fact and what's not. Another thing that is often attributed to Muhammad is the ill treatment of women in the Muslim world, and certainly we find that today. But I don't think I would necessarily blame that on Muhammad.
It doesn't seem so.
No, not at all. Not his regulations. Also, the way women dress. The whole thing about wearing veils and burqas and things like that. This predates Muhammad. Women in Arabia, regardless of their religion, wore veils. And they did it not as a sign of subservience to their husbands, but rather as a sign of modesty and status. So, like, for instance, the controversy that's gone on over in France the last couple of years about teenage girls wearing veils to, Muslim girls wearing veils to French high schools. In fact, it's an incredibly insulting thing to make them take those veils off. That's the same thing as a chastity ring, And anyway, so something to keep in mind. What happens is that much of Islamic tradition and law comes not from the Quran itself, but rather from these events that take place in Medina, and then also a whole bunch of recollections that are gathered together called the Hadith. And these are sayings of Muhammad. So they're not written in the Quran, but somewhere after his death, somebody turns around and goes, "Oh, yeah, I was with the Prophet one night, and he said this." And some of them are reliable and some are not. But the fact of the matter is that there are 700,000 of these Hadith.
He must have been spouting off a lot.
Well, yeah. But I think a lot of these, too, are done for self-serving purposes.
Sure.
And scholars ever since then, Muslim scholars ever since then, have tried to figure out which was which. Yeah. And it's really impossible in many ways to sort them out, although some sources are more reliable than other sources, and you can see whether or not they are reflecting Muhammad or reflecting the author of the Hadith. Good example of that is the second caliph. We'll talk about him in the next program. But his name is Omar, and he had a real problem with women. And he, after Muhammad is gone, he began remembering all kinds of things that Muhammad supposedly said about putting women in their place, and particularly the wives of Muhammad.
Yeah.
And they were not well treated by this guy.
Okay.
Anyway, we'll take a look at Omar a little bit later on. This whole happy vacation came to a crashing halt in Medina when the Meccan army came against them. The Qusayya family was not going to let Muhammad sit off in a neighboring city and get away with this, and so they attacked with some 3,000 warriors.
Wow.
As well as 200 cavalry. That is a big force for Arabia back in those days. And Muhammad was basically, what could he do? And he gathered his followers together, and he turned to the Jewish Arabs who had given him hospitality. And they all said, good luck, we'll see you after this is all over. And they had 2 castles that they had built. They put themselves up in those castles and just hid there. This is not our fight. So, well, there it was. What then happens is that Muhammad gathered together this tiny little band against these over 3,000. And the first thing he did was he attacked. And sometimes audacious attacks like that are successful. And at first he was successful. They could not, the Meccans could not believe that he was attacking. And so they were shocked. And then they got their wits back together again, and then they attacked, and there was a terrible slaughter at the Battle of Uhud. Followed after that is another battle which Muhammad wins. This is the Battle of Badr. And following after that is a call for all followers of the Prophet to take up arms in order to protect the religion. And the word for this is a jihad. It's a holy war. Now, there have been many interpretations all throughout history, and we certainly find it down to today. It's a very contemporary issue for us today. And you have the whole range. You have those people who argue that a jihad is a self-war. You're warring with your lower self in order to purify yourself to come to a closer relationship with God. That's one. Then you've got a very contemporary view that it's a war against anyone who isn't exactly like you, and that's sort of the Osama bin Laden kind of interpretation. But anyway, the fact of the matter is, in 630 A.D., Muhammad now has gotten a huge force, 10,000.
Wow.
And he attacks Mecca, and he wins.
Wow.
And he enters Mecca, enters the Kaaba, and he and Ali, he's the only one who goes with him. They went into the Kaaba, and one by one, they brought out each of the idols and destroyed them right there in front of everybody. 2 years later, in 632, his follower Abu Bakr leads Friday prayers while Muhammad had gone back to Medina. He was not ill. He was not well. He was very ill. And one Friday, Abu Bakr's sermon concluded saying this, and I quote, "O men, if anyone worships Muhammad, Muhammad is dead. If anyone worships God, God is alive, immortal." It was his way of letting the people know that the prophet was dead. And this Omar, this great big huge soldier, this really mean, fell down on the ground sobbing. And the great question, of course, is what now? Because nobody had planned on him ever dying.
Right.
Nobody wanted to bring it up. And so the great question then is, what is going to happen to all of his followers? What happens to all of his followers is what we'll be looking at in our next program. And it's going to be contentious, and it's going to split his followers in two right from the very beginning. And that split is going to remain right down to today.
Wow.
Between the followers of Ali, and it's called the Party of Ali, the Shia, and the followers of the other group, the Abu Bakr people, the Sunni.
Okay.
And then there are half dozen. Others. Yeah, right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this will be good. We've already learned a lot more about Muhammad that I didn't know. And so now we'll see the origins of the Shia and the Sunni next week.
Yeah, and the real coming of Islam as we know it today.
Right,
Yeah.
right, because it sounds like they split off considerably from where Muhammad had left things.
Yeah, and it really has to do with who then becomes the successor to the prophet. Nobody else is a prophet. He's the last prophet, but the question is, who's going to then be his successor? The term for that is the caliph. Who's going to become the sheikh, if you want? You know, he was the sheikh of the Ummah. Now he's gone. Who becomes the next sheikh? And does it happen through dynastic lines?
Right.
Does his cousin have the right then? Or does it happen through whatever lines? have a vote, because that's what happened. That's what happened, is that Abu Bakr he's a wealthy merchant.
Right.
He gets voted in as caliph. It just so happened that he got voted in at a meeting where Ali was not present because he was preparing the corpse of Muhammad for burial.
Oh.
Oh.
Okay. Well, and so it begins.
Do we have time for one little quote?
Yes, we do.
This actually comes from the dust cover of Reza Aslan's book.
Okay.
And I'd just like to read you a couple paragraphs here because I think it really puts all of this in perspective.
Great.
Okay, and says the following. It says, soon after his death, the prophet's successors set about the overwhelming task of defining and interpreting Muhammad's message for future generations. Their efforts led to the development of a comprehensive code of conduct that was expected to regulate every aspect of the believer's life. But this attempt only widened the chasm between Orthodox Islam and its two major sects, Shiism and Sufism. It's interesting that he would say that, but anyway, both of which Aslan discussed in rich detail, which is true. Finally, No God But God, the book, examines how, in the shadow of European colonialism, Muslims developed conflicting strategies to reconcile traditional Islamic values with the social and political realities of the modern world. With the emergence of the Islamic State in the 20th century, this contest over the future of Islam has become a passionate, sometimes violent battle between those who seek to enforce a rigid and archaic legal code and those who struggle to harmonize the teaching of the Prophet with contemporary ideals of democracy and human rights. According to Reza Aslan, we are now living in an era of, and I quote here, the Islamic Reformation, not revolution, Reformation. No God But God is a persuasive and elegantly written account of the roots of this Reformation and the future of the Islamic faith. Now remember, he's a Muslim.
Yeah.
And his take on Christianity and Christianity's conversation as it is with the modern world and his understanding of the Protestant Reformation is quite different from mine. But what he believes is that where he does get it right, I think, as far as Christianity is concerned, is that Christianity had a long conversation that took centuries between the modern world and Christianity itself. We saw that in the early part of early modern history, early modern church history. And the church was always and is always in dialogue with science. It's never become a religion versus science thing with the Catholic Church.
No.
Now, the deal is that as we have come into modernity and are quite familiar with that, now we don't necessarily accept modernism, but modernity we very much accept and embrace and want to use the benefits of modern civilization for all mankind. Islam has to do the same thing. And his point in this book is that there are those people who want to take Islam back into the Middle Ages. Mm-hmm. Well, we can certainly see that. Look what happened with the Taliban in Afghanistan.
Right.
And the vision of Osama bin Laden with this new caliphate that he wants to create worldwide, and so there are those people who want to take and certainly the whole teaching of Wahhabism within Islam. That all takes us into one direction. But his point is that the vast majority of Muslims in the world want to live in the 21st century. They don't want to compromise their morals. Well, we don't either. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the reasons why when you have United Nations conferences like the one that took place in Cairo, the Catholic Church's best ally
were the
Muslims.
Right.
Yeah, and the best ally of the Muslims was the Catholic Church because we're family friendly, we're pro-life, and we've got those things going for each other. We understand our anthropologies similarly in that. And in that we stand against the modern world because we think the modern world is wrong in this. And just because it's modern doesn't make it right.
Exactly.
So, anyway, that's the great struggle that's going on in contemporary Islam, and I think that's one of the reasons why people like Pope Benedict are engaged in this in order to help those reformers who want to do it right.
The right way. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as opposed to going back to the Middle Ages.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, and there we should pray.
Yes, that's right.
So, shall we?
Let's pray. Okay. Glory be to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
May Almighty God bless you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen. Thank you, Father.
Okay.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.